I stood by Grandma Ruth's graveside watching dirt fall onto the casket that held the woman who'd raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 8. The small cemetery overlooked the farm that had been in our family for 3 generations. Its rolling hills dotted with the black and white cattle that Grandma had loved more than most people. My cousin Derek stood on the opposite side of the grave, his expensive suit looking out of place among the work clothes and simple dresses worn by neighbors who'd come to pay their respects. He'd arrived from Chicago just that morning, the first time I'd seen him in 5 years, though he'd grown up on this same farm before moving to the city for college and never looking back. The preacher's words about eternal rest and heavenly rewards washed over me while I struggled with the reality that the only parent I'd ever really known was gone. Grandma Ruth had been 87, but still insisted on feeding cattle every morning and checking fence lines every evening until the stroke took her 3 days ago. After the service, as neighbors offered condolences and shared memories of Grandma's generosity and stubborn independence, Derek approached me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He'd inherited his father's height and his mother's sharp features, but something in his expression reminded me of a hawk circling prey. "Sorry for your loss, Jake," he said, extending a hand that felt soft compared to the calloused palms of the farmers around us. "I know Grandma meant a lot to you, especially after what happened to your folks." His tone carried a condescension that made my jaw clench, but I shook his hand anyway, maintaining the politeness Grandma had drilled into me since childhood. At 25, I'd been working this farm for 7 years, ever since graduating high school and choosing agriculture over college, much to Derek's vocal disapproval. "She was everything to me," I replied simply, not trusting myself to say more without revealing the anger that had been building since Derek's arrival. Chapter 2. Claims and Assumptions. The next morning, I found Derek standing in the farmyard surveying the barn and outbuildings with the calculating gaze of someone appraising valuable property. He'd changed from his funeral suit into khakis and a polo shirt that screamed suburban weekend warrior, his city-soft hands clasped behind his back as he studied infrastructure he'd never helped maintain. "We need to talk about the farm's future," Derek announced when he noticed my approach from the cattle pasture where I'd been checking water troughs. "I've been thinking about this property's development potential, and the numbers are quite impressive." The casual way he discussed development potential while standing 50 feet from where we'd buried Grandma yesterday made my stomach turn. This land represented more than real estate value. It was the foundation of everything our family had built through decades of hard work and careful stewardship. "Development?" I asked, though I suspected I knew where this conversation was heading. Derek had always viewed the farm as an asset to be liquidated rather than a legacy to be preserved. "The barn and land are mine now," Derek said with a laugh that held no humor. "Grandma's will makes that crystal clear. As the oldest grandchild and only college graduate in the family, I inherit the primary property while you get some personal items and a small cash settlement." His matter-of-fact delivery of this news hit me like a physical blow. Grandma had never discussed the specifics of her will with me, but I'd assumed that 7 years of daily work and constant presence would count for something in her final decisions. "I haven't seen any will," I said carefully, trying to keep emotion out of my voice while my world shifted beneath my feet. "When did Grandma tell you about these arrangements?" Derek's smile grew wider and more predatory. "She didn't need to tell me, Jake. It's simple logic. I'm the successful one with business experience and education. You're just a farmhand who never left the county." The dismissive description of my life's work and commitment to this place stung more than I wanted to admit. But something about Derek's confidence seemed forced, as if he was trying to convince himself as much as me. Chapter 3. Seeking Answers. That afternoon, I drove to town to meet with Harold Morrison, the lawyer who'd handled Grandma's legal affairs for over 30 years. His office occupied the second floor of the old bank building on Main Street, its wood-paneled walls lined with law books and family photos that spoke of deep roots in our rural community. "Jake, I'm sorry for your loss," Harold said, rising from behind his desk to shake my hand with genuine warmth. "Your grandmother was a remarkable woman who spoke of you with great pride right up until the end." The kindness in his voice almost broke my composure, but I managed to maintain control while explaining Derek's claims about inheriting the farm and my confusion about arrangements I'd never heard discussed. "Derek seems very confident about the will's contents," I said, settling into the leather chair across from Harold's desk. "But something about his attitude doesn't sit right with me." Harold's expression grew thoughtful as he pulled a thick file from his cabinet, the folder marked with Grandma's name in his careful handwriting. I can understand your concern, Jake. Family dynamics around inheritance can become quite complicated, especially when there are significant assets involved. He opened the file and reviewed several documents, his frown deepening as he examined papers that seemed to require careful consideration. I need to ask you something important, Jake. Has Derek shown you any legal documents, or is his claim based solely on verbal assertions? Just verbal so far, I replied, watching Harold's face for clues about what the papers might contain. He seemed very certain about the arrangements, but he hasn't produced any documentation. Harold leaned back in his chair, his expression troubled. That's interesting, because according to my records, I never prepared a will that would give Derek primary inheritance of the farm property. In fact, the most recent will I have on file tells a very different story. The words sent hope racing through my chest, but I tried to remain calm while Harold continued his examination of the legal documents that would determine my future and the farm's fate. What does the will you have actually say? I asked, hardly daring to hope that Derek's confident claims might be unfounded. Chapter 4. The Real Will. Harold adjusted his reading glasses and pulled out a document bearing official seals and Grandma's familiar signature, dated just 6 months before her death. His expression grew more serious as he reviewed the contents, occasionally glancing up at me with something that looked like relief mixed with concern. According to this will, which is definitely the most recent version in my files, Harold began, your grandmother left the farm, barn, and all agricultural equipment to you, Jake. Derek inherits the house in town that belonged to your grandfather, plus a cash settlement of $10,000. The words hit me like a lightning bolt of relief and vindication, but also raised troubling questions about Derek's confident assertions regarding his inheritance of the farm property. How could he have been so certain about arrangements that apparently didn't exist? She also included a letter explaining her reasoning, Harold continued, which I'm required to read to both heirs when they're present. She specifically wanted Derek to understand why she made these decisions. I felt a mixture of joy and apprehension about confronting Derek with this information. His reaction to learning he'd been wrong about inheriting the farm would likely be explosive, especially given the contemptuous way he'd spoken about my contributions to our family's agricultural legacy. There's something else, Harold added, his tone growing more cautious. Your grandmother mentioned concerns about family members who might challenge the will or attempt to claim inheritance rights they didn't actually possess. The statement suggested that Grandma had anticipated potential conflicts over her estate, perhaps even specifically concerning Derek's expectations about inheriting property that had never been promised to him. When do we need to meet with Derek to read the full will? I asked, dreading the confrontation but eager to resolve the uncertainty that had plagued me since yesterday's funeral. Harold consulted his calendar, then looked up with an expression that suggested he was also anticipating a difficult meeting. I can arrange for both of you to come in tomorrow afternoon. This is definitely a conversation that needs to happen sooner rather than later. That evening, I walked the farm's boundaries, checking cattle and fence lines while processing the dramatic reversal of fortune that Harold's revelations had provided. Tomorrow would bring vindication, but also family conflict that might never fully heal. Chapter 5. The Confrontation. The next afternoon, Derek sat across from Harold's desk, wearing the confident smirk of someone who believed he was about to receive official confirmation of his inheritance claims. He dressed in another expensive outfit, this time a navy blazer and pressed slacks that emphasized his success in the business world beyond our rural community. I appreciate you expediting this meeting, Harold, Derek said with the patronizing tone he used when addressing people he considered beneath his social station. I know Jake is anxious to understand the transition arrangements, and I'm eager to begin planning the property's development. Harold's expression remained carefully neutral as he placed the official will on his desk between us, along with several other documents that I assumed contained supporting materials and legal explanations. Before we proceed, Harold said formally, I want to make sure both of you understand that this reading represents the final and binding determination of your grandmother's wishes regarding her estate. Derek nodded impatiently, clearly expecting confirmation of claims he'd stated so confidently yesterday. I sat quietly, knowing that the next few minutes would either validate Harold's reassurances or confirm Derek's version of our inheritance. According to Ruth Morrison's last will and testament, Harold began, the farm property consisting of 240 acres, all agricultural buildings including the barn and farming equipment are bequeathed to her grandson Jacob Morrison. Derek's smirk vanished instantly, replaced by confusion and growing anger as Harold's words contradicted everything he'd claimed about inheriting the primary property. The house at 412 Elm Street in town, along with all furnishings and a cash settlement of $10,000, are bequeathed to her grandson, Derek Morrison. That's impossible, Derek interrupted, his voice rising with indignation. There must be some mistake. I'm the educated one, the successful one. Jake's just a farm worker. Harold continued reading without acknowledging Derek's outburst, his professional demeanor unchanged despite the tension filling his office like smoke from a fire that was just beginning to burn. Chapter 6. Grandma's Letter. Harold set aside the formal will and picked up a handwritten letter bearing Grandma's distinctive script, the paper showing signs of careful handling and multiple readings. His expression softened as he prepared to share words that would explain the reasoning behind decisions that had clearly shocked Derek to his core. Your grandmother also left a letter explaining her decisions, Harold said, which she specifically requested be read to both grandsons together. Derek leaned forward in his chair, his face flushed with anger and disbelief, while I tried to prepare myself for whatever wisdom or explanations Grandma had wanted to share beyond the grave. Harold cleared his throat and began reading in his measured, professional voice. To my grandsons, Derek and Jake, if you are hearing this letter, then I am gone, and you are dealing with questions about why I made the choices reflected in my will. The familiar cadence of Grandma's speech patterns came through even in Harold's formal delivery, making her presence feel almost tangible in the wood-paneled office where we sat, grappling with family dynamics she'd tried to address through careful legal planning. Derek, you have built a successful life in the city, using the education I was proud to help finance. You have talents for business and ambition that will take you far in the world beyond our farm. But you have also made it clear through words and actions that you view this land as an asset to be sold, rather than a legacy to be preserved. Derek's face grew redder with each word, but Harold continued reading without pause, delivering Grandma's posthumous assessment of family members who were learning things about themselves they might not have wanted to hear. Jake has spent 7 years learning every aspect of this farm's operation, from soil management to cattle breeding to equipment maintenance. More importantly, he has demonstrated the kind of commitment to our family's agricultural heritage that ensures it will survive for another generation. The letter continued with specific examples of my contributions to the farm's success, and Derek's growing disconnection from rural life, painting a picture of two grandsons who'd chosen very different paths and earned correspondingly different inheritances. Chapter 7. Derek's Disbelief. This is absolutely ridiculous, Derek exploded, jumping to his feet and pacing to the window overlooking Main Street. Jake manipulated a senile old woman into changing her will. This whole thing reeks of undue influence. Harold's expression remained calm, despite Derek's accusations, suggesting he'd anticipated this reaction and prepared for potential challenges to Grandma's final wishes. I can assure you that your grandmother was completely competent when she updated her will 6 months ago. I insisted on a medical evaluation specifically to prevent such claims. Derek whirled around to face us, his expensive clothes and city mannerisms looking increasingly out of place in the rural lawyer's office where family business was conducted with handshakes and mutual respect rather than threats and accusations. There has to be another will, Derek insisted, his voice carrying the desperation of someone watching carefully laid plans disintegrate. Maybe something more recent that Jake is hiding, or that Harold hasn't found yet. I can guarantee that this is the most recent will on file, Harold replied firmly. Your grandmother was very specific about her intentions and very careful about documentation. She even mentioned expecting potential challenges from family members who might disagree with her decisions. Derek's face showed a range of emotions from anger to disbelief to something approaching panic as he realized that his confident assumptions about inheriting the farm had been completely wrong. How much is the farm worth? Because I want my fair share of the total estate value. Harold consulted another document before responding. The farm has been appraised at approximately $400,000. The townhouse is worth about $60,000, which, combined with the $10,000 cash settlement, gives you roughly $70,000 total. The math was brutally clear. Derek would receive less than 20% of the estate's total value, a dramatic reversal from the inheritance arrangement he'd assumed would make him the primary beneficiary of Grandma's lifetime of work and careful saving. This isn't over, Derek said, grabbing his jacket and heading for the door. I'm going to contest this will and prove that Jake manipulated our grandmother. No court will let a farmhand steal what rightfully belongs to the educated heir. Chapter 8. Unexpected. Ally. 3 days after the will reading, I was repairing fence posts in the back pasture when I heard a vehicle coming up the gravel road that led to our farm. Through the trees, I could see a pickup truck I didn't recognize, its license plates indicating it had traveled from out of state to reach our rural Tennessee property. The driver who emerged was a man in his 40s with graying hair, and the weathered hands of someone who'd spent his life working outdoors. He wore clean work clothes and moved with the purposeful stride of someone who had important business to conduct. "Are you Jake Morrison?" he asked as I approached, extending his hand in a firm handshake that reminded me of the way Grandma had taught me to greet strangers with respect and directness. "Yes, sir," I replied, studying his face for clues about what had brought him to our farm during such a difficult time. "Can I help you with something?" "I'm Michael Morrison, your cousin Ruth's nephew from her sister's side of the family. I drove down from Kentucky as soon as I heard about the funeral and the will dispute that Derek is apparently planning." The introduction surprised me, as I'd never heard Grandma mention family members from her sister's branch of the Morrison tree. But something in Michael's manner suggested he had legitimate connections to our family and important information to share. "Derek's been calling lawyers and family members trying to build a case for contesting the will," Michael continued, his expression showing disapproval of such tactics. "He seems to think that his education and city success automatically entitle him to inherit the farm." "I take it you disagree with his position?" I asked, curious about this unexpected ally who'd appeared when I most needed support for maintaining Grandma's final wishes. "Completely," Michael replied with conviction. "But more importantly, I have documents that Derek apparently doesn't know exist, papers that make his contest of the will not just wrong, but potentially illegal." The mention of additional documents that could support Grandma's will sent hope coursing through my chest, especially given Derek's confidence about challenging arrangements he considered unfair or fraudulent. Chapter 9. Hidden Evidence. Michael reached into his truck and retrieved a manila folder containing what appeared to be correspondence, legal documents, and photographs spanning several decades. His careful handling of the materials suggested they were both valuable and relevant to the inheritance dispute that Derek was threatening to pursue through the courts. "Your grandmother and my mother stayed in close contact throughout their lives," Michael explained, settling onto the farmhouse porch where we could examine his documents in good light. When Ruth became concerned about family dynamics around her estate planning, she shared copies of important papers with my mother for safekeeping. The precaution revealed Grandma's foresight about potential inheritance conflicts and her determination to protect her final wishes from challenges that might arise after her death. She'd apparently anticipated Derek's reaction and taken steps to ensure her decisions would survive legal scrutiny. "This is a copy of a letter Derek wrote to Ruth 5 years ago," Michael said, pulling out a document that made my breath catch. "He was requesting financial help for a business investment, but read what he says about the farm." I scanned Derek's letter, my anger growing with each paragraph that dismissed the farm as worthless agricultural property and suggested Grandma should liquidate rural assets and invest in profitable ventures. His words revealed a fundamental contempt for the life and work that had supported our family for generations. "There's more," Michael continued, producing additional correspondence that painted a picture of Derek's attitude toward family heritage and rural values. He actually suggested she sell the farm and move to an assisted living facility in Chicago, where he could keep an eye on her. The letters documented a pattern of Derek treating Grandma as an inconvenience, whose property would be better managed by someone with his business acumen and urban sophistication. Each document strengthened the case for why she'd chosen to leave the farm to someone who valued it as more than a real estate transaction. "Why are you sharing this with me?" I asked, grateful for the support, but curious about Michael's motivations for getting involved in our family's inheritance dispute. "Because family land should stay with family members who understand its value," Michael replied simply. "Derek may have legal rights, but he's lost any moral claim to inherit property he's spent years telling Ruth to sell." Chapter 10. Building the Defense. Over the following week, Michael and I worked with Harold Morrison to build a comprehensive response to Derek's threatened will contest. The evidence Michael had brought, combined with Harold's meticulous documentation of Grandma's mental competency and clear decision-making process, created a strong foundation for defending her final wishes. "Derek's case relies on claiming undue influence," Harold explained during one of our strategy meetings in his office. "But these letters prove that Ruth's decision to favor Jake was based on years of observing both grandsons' attitudes toward the family farm. The correspondence Derek had written revealed not just his dismissive attitude toward rural life, but specific instances where he'd pressured Grandma to sell property and move to the city. His own words would become evidence against his claims of deserving the primary inheritance. We also have testimony from neighbors about Jake's dedication to the farm operation, Harold continued, plus financial records showing how his work improved the property's productivity and value during the 7 years he's been managing daily operations. Michael had contacted other family members who could provide additional context about Derek's relationship with Grandma and his stated intentions regarding the farm's future. Their stories painted a consistent picture of someone who'd viewed his grandmother's property as an asset to be liquidated, rather than a legacy to be preserved. The strongest evidence is actually Derek's own behavior since the funeral, Harold noted with satisfaction. His immediate discussion of development potential and his contemptuous attitude toward Jake's contributions show exactly the mindset that concerned Ruth when she made her final decisions. I felt cautiously optimistic about our chances of defeating Derek's challenge, but also sad that family relationships had deteriorated to the point where legal battles were necessary to honor Grandma's memory and protect her final wishes. How long will this process take? I asked, thinking about the farm work that needed attention and the uncertainty that would hang over everything until the inheritance dispute was resolved. Probably 6 months if Derek follows through with his threats, Harold replied. But I suspect he'll reconsider once he realizes how much evidence exists to support Ruth's decision-making process and demonstrate his unsuitability as heir to agricultural property. Chapter 11. The Settlement. 2 months later, Derek's attorney requested a meeting to discuss potential settlement options rather than proceeding with a costly and potentially embarrassing will contest. The evidence Michael had provided, combined with testimony from neighbors and family members, had apparently convinced Derek's legal team that challenging Grandma's will would be both expensive and futile. My client is prepared to accept the inheritance arrangements outlined in Mrs. Morrison's will, Derek's lawyer announced during a tense meeting in Harold's office. However, he requests additional compensation for emotional distress and lost expectations regarding the family farm. Harold's response was swift and definitive. The will is clear and legally binding. There will be no additional compensation beyond what Ruth Morrison specifically designated for Derek's inheritance. Derek sat silently during most of the meeting, his earlier confidence replaced by sullen resentment as he realized his challenge had failed to achieve its intended goals. The documentation of his dismissive attitude toward the farm and his pressure on Grandma to sell had undermined any sympathy for his position. Derek will receive the townhouse and $10,000 as specified in the will, Harold continued. In return, he agrees not to pursue further legal challenges and acknowledges Jake's rightful ownership of the farm property. The settlement papers were signed with minimal conversation, ending months of uncertainty and family conflict. Derek's signature carried the weight of defeated ambitions and forced acceptance of arrangements he'd never expected or wanted. After Derek and his attorney left, Michael shook my hand with the satisfaction of someone who'd helped ensure justice prevailed over entitlement. Your grandmother would be proud that you fought to preserve her wishes and the farm she loved. That evening, I walked the property boundaries as I had countless times before, but now with the security of knowing that this land was truly mine to steward for future generations. The responsibility felt both exciting and daunting, but I was determined to honor Grandma's faith in my ability to preserve our family's agricultural heritage. I won't let you down, Grandma, I whispered to the evening breeze that rustled through the oak trees she'd planted as a young bride 70 years ago. Chapter 12. Moving forward. 6 months after Grandma's funeral, the farm was operating more efficiently than ever before, with improvements and expansions that honored her memory while embracing modern agricultural practices. Derek had completed his move back to Chicago, selling the townhouse and using those proceeds to fund whatever business ventures occupied his urban life. Michael had become a regular visitor, driving down from Kentucky monthly to help with major projects and share stories about our extended family that Grandma had never told me. His support during the inheritance dispute had evolved into a friendship that enriched my understanding of our family's history and values. You've done remarkable things with this place, Michael observed during his latest visit, surveying the new equipment barn and improved cattle facilities that represented my commitment to long-term agricultural success. Ruth would be amazed by the progress you've made. The farm's financial performance had improved dramatically with focused attention and strategic investments in infrastructure and livestock genetics. What Derek had dismissed as worthless agricultural property was generating enough income to support continued growth and modernization. I'd also begun dating Sarah Williams, the veterinarian who'd been caring for our cattle for the past 3 years. Her knowledge of animal health and farm management complemented my practical experience, creating a partnership that promised both personal happiness and professional success. "Any regrets about the way things worked out with Derek?" Sarah asked one evening as we sat on the farmhouse porch watching sunset paint the sky above our pastures. "Only that Grandma didn't live to see the farm's success," I replied honestly. "Derek made his choice about what mattered to him years ago. The farm deserved someone who would fight for its future, not someone who saw it as an asset to liquidate." The inheritance battle had taught me valuable lessons about family loyalty, legal preparation, and the importance of surrounding yourself with people who shared your values and supported your dream. Grandma's will had given me more than land. It had provided the foundation for building a life dedicated to preserving agricultural traditions while embracing innovation and growth. Chapter 13. Legacy Fulfilled. Standing in the barn that Derek had once claimed as his inheritance, I surveyed equipment and facilities that represented 3 generations of Morrison family dedication to agricultural excellence. The morning sunlight streaming through windows revealed a space that buzzed with productive activity, from cattle feeding operations to equipment maintenance that kept our farming operation running smoothly. Sarah worked alongside me now, having joined the farm as my partner in both business and life. Our engagement had been announced at the county fair, where our prize-winning cattle had drawn admiration from neighboring farmers who respected our commitment to livestock quality and genetic improvement. "Your grandmother's will changed more than just property ownership," Sarah observed as we reviewed plans for expanding our breeding program. "It preserved a way of life that Derek would have destroyed within 5 years." The truth in her words reminded me daily of the responsibility I'd inherited along with the land. This farm represented more than personal success. It was a link to agricultural traditions that deserved preservation and a foundation for future generations who would face their own challenges in rural America. Michael's monthly visits had evolved into family gatherings that included his wife and children, creating connections that strengthened our extended family network. His support during the inheritance dispute had grown into lifelong friendship based on shared values and mutual respect for the land that sustained us. Derek's occasional Christmas cards from Chicago carried polite inquiries about farm operations, but his tone remained distant and formal. He'd built his successful urban life without looking back at the rural heritage he'd rejected, apparently content with choices that had led him away from our family's agricultural foundation. That evening, as Sarah and I planned our wedding and discussed dreams of raising children who would learn to love this land as much as we did, I felt profound gratitude for Grandma's wisdom in recognizing who would protect her legacy and who would destroy it. The barn and land were indeed mine, but more importantly, they belonged to future generations who would benefit from decisions made by a wise woman who understood that inheritance was about more than money. It was about values, commitment, and the courage to choose preservation over profit. Thank you for listening to my story about family, inheritance, and the unexpected ways that legal documents can reveal truth about relationships and priorities. I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Please tell me what part of the world you're listening from, and share your own experiences with family businesses or agricultural heritage. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories about rural life, family dynamics, and the ongoing challenges of preserving agricultural traditions in modern America. Your support helps me continue sharing these tales that celebrate the wisdom and resilience of farming families who understand that the best inheritance is the knowledge and values passed between generations.